Download this audiobook in high-quality MP3 format at MindShelf.net. Preface: The Architecture of Power. Most people think they understand power. They associate it with titles, money, authority, or visible dominance. They imagine power as something loud, something that announces itself, demands attention, and forces outcomes. But real power rarely looks like that. In fact, the most effective forms of power are often the least visible. They operate quietly, shaping decisions before they are even recognized as decisions. They guide behavior without resistance. They influence outcomes without appearing to intervene. This is why power is so often misunderstood. People don't see power directly. They experience its effects, opportunities appearing or disappearing, voices being heard or ignored, certain individuals moving forward effortlessly while others struggle despite equal effort. From the outside, it feels unpredictable. From the inside, it follows structure. Power is not random. It is not mystical. And it is not reserved for a select few. It is built. Like any structure, power has foundations, layers, and points of failure. It can be designed with intention or accumulated by accident. It can be strengthened, maintained, or quietly lost over time. And most importantly, it can be understood. This book is not about controlling people. It is not a collection of tactics, tricks, or psychological shortcuts designed to manipulate others. That approach is shallow, unstable, and ultimately ineffective in the long term. Instead, this book is about clarity. It is about seeing the systems that already exist around you, systems of influence, perception, and positioning that shape outcomes every day. Once you begin to see them, you realize something important. Power was never absent. It was simply invisible. The goal of this book is to make it visible, to break power down into its components, to understand how it is built, how it is sustained, and how it breaks, and ultimately to give you the ability to navigate it consciously, rather than react to it unconsciously. Because whether you choose to engage with power or not, you are already inside its structure. The only question is, do you see it? Part 1. Seeing Power. Chapter 1. The Invisible Structure. Most structures that shape your life are invisible. You don't see them, yet you move within them every day. You don't question them, yet they define what is possible for you and what is not. Power is one of those structures. It does not announce itself. It does not need to. By the time you notice it, it has already shaped the outcome. A decision has already been influenced. A direction has already been set. A door has already opened or closed. And often, you won't know why. You don't see power. You feel its effects. Think about the last time someone spoke in a room and everyone listened. Nothing dramatic happened. No one was forced to pay attention. There were no visible signs of control. And yet the room shifted. Conversations paused. Focus aligned. Attention moved toward that person almost automatically. Now, think about the opposite. Someone speaks, perhaps even with good ideas, and nothing happens. People glance away. The energy doesn't change. The words fall flat, not because they lack value, but because they lack weight. This difference is not random. It is not luck. It is not personality alone. And it is not simply confidence. It is structure, an invisible arrangement of perception, positioning, and subtle signals that determine whose voice carries and whose doesn't. Most people try to improve what is visible, their words, their tone, their effort. Few understand what actually determines the outcome. Power exists before the moment. The outcome is decided earlier than you think. By the time an interaction happens, much of its outcome is already set. Not consciously, not explicitly, but structurally. People walk into rooms with invisible layers attached to them: how they are perceived, what they are associated with, what they represent in the mind of others. These layers shape how everything they say will be received. Two people can say the same sentence. One will be heard as insight, the other will be heard as noise. The difference is not the sentence. It is the structure surrounding the speaker. This is why effort alone often feels inconsistent. You can say the right things and still be ignored. You can work harder and still be overlooked. You can be capable and still not be chosen. Because power is not determined in the moment. It is built around the moment. What you think is natural is often engineered. Many people believe that influence is something natural. They assume certain individuals are simply born with it, more charismatic, more persuasive, more dominant. And while personality plays a role, it is rarely the deciding factor. What appears natural is often the result of accumulated structure, years of positioning, consistent signals of credibility, strategic exposure, association with the right environments. Over time, these elements compound. Eventually, they become invisible, not because they disappeared, but because they became expected. When someone walks into a room and is immediately respected, it feels natural. But what you are seeing is not natural. You are seeing the result of a structure that has already been built. Power rarely needs to prove itself. One of the clearest signs of power is the absence of effort. Those who truly hold it rarely need to assert it directly. They don't need to convince, argue, or dominate conversations. Their presence does most of the work before they speak. This is often misunderstood. People assume that power must be visible to be real, that it must be expressed loudly, reinforced constantly, or defended aggressively. In reality, the opposite is true. The more power needs to prove itself, the less stable it is. True power operates with minimal friction. It aligns rather than forces. It influences rather than insists. And because of that, it often goes unnoticed. Why most people miss it. The reason power remains invisible is simple. People are trained to look in the wrong place. They focus on words instead of positioning, actions instead of perception, effort instead of leverage. They analyze what happens in the moment without seeing what made the moment possible. This creates a distorted understanding of reality. They try to replicate outcomes without understanding the structure behind them. They copy behavior, tone, even language, yet fail to achieve the same results. Because what they are copying is surface level. Power does not live on the surface. Seeing the structure changes everything. Once you begin to see power as a structure, something shifts. You stop asking, "What should I say? How do I act?" And you start asking, "How am I positioned? How am I perceived? What structure am I operating within?" This is the turning point. Because when you understand structure, you stop relying on chance. You stop trying to force outcomes in moments that were never designed for you to win. And instead, you begin to shape the conditions before the moment arrives. A different way to think about power. Power is not something you turn on. It is something you build around yourself. It exists in the environments you choose, the signals you send, the associations you create. the way others interpret your presence, and most importantly, it exists in what happens before anything happens. This is why two people can live in the same world, follow similar paths, and experience completely different realities. They are not operating under the same structure. The first shift. Before you learn how to build power, you need to see it, not as something abstract or distant, but as something present, active, and already shaping your life. You are not outside of power. You are inside it. Every interaction you have, every opportunity you encounter, every outcome you experience, is influenced by structures you may not yet see. But once you do, you cannot unsee them. And from that point forward, the way you move through the world begins to change. Closing insight. Power is not hidden. It is simply not obvious. And the moment you begin to recognize its structure, you gain something most people never do: clarity. Chapter 2. The Illusion of Control. Most people believe they are in control of their lives. They believe their decisions are their own. Their opinions are self-formed. Their direction is chosen deliberately. And to some extent, this is true, but only partially. Because what feels like control is often something else. A structured set of influences guiding your choices before you become aware of them. You choose, but within a frame. Every decision you make happens inside a frame, a set of options, perspectives, and perceived possibilities that define what feels reasonable, desirable, or even visible to you. You choose, but you don't choose everything. You don't choose what options are presented to you, how those options are framed, what feels familiar or acceptable. These elements shape your decisions long before you consciously make them. Two people can face the same situation and make completely different choices, not because one is smarter or more capable, but because they are operating within different frames. And those frames are rarely accidental. They are shaped by environment, exposure, and influence. The comfort of believing you're in control. There is a reason people hold tightly to the idea of control. It is comforting. It gives a sense of stability, a sense of ownership, a sense that outcomes are directly tied to effort and intention. But this belief can also be limiting, because if you assume you are fully in control, you stop questioning the forces shaping your decisions. You stop asking, why do I want this? Where did this idea come from? Who benefits from this direction? And when you stop asking these questions, you become easier to influence, not through force, but through subtle alignment. Influence works best when it's unnoticed. The most effective influence does not feel like influence. It feels like a natural thought, a personal preference, a logical conclusion. When influence becomes visible, it creates resistance. When it remains invisible, it becomes part of your thinking. This is where power operates most efficiently, not by telling you what to do, but by shaping what feels right to do. You don't feel controlled, you feel aligned. The environment is doing more than you think. Look at the environments you spend time in. Your work, your social circles, the content you consume daily. Each of these environments carries its own set of values, expectations, and signals. Over time, they begin to shape what you consider normal, what you consider possible, what you consider worth pursuing. This happens gradually, so gradually that it rarely feels external. It feels like you. But much of what you believe to be your thinking is influenced by the structures around you. Repetition creates reality. One of the simplest ways to influence is through repetition. The more you are exposed to something, the more familiar it becomes. The more familiar it becomes, the more acceptable it feels. The more acceptable it feels, the more likely you are to adopt it. This applies to ideas, behaviors, and even identities. What you hear repeatedly starts to feel true. What you see consistently starts to feel normal. Over time, repetition doesn't just inform your thinking, it defines it. And once something feels like your own idea, you stop questioning it. Why effort alone isn't enough. Many people believe that if they work hard enough, they can shape their outcomes. And effort does matter. But effort without awareness of structure leads to frustration, because you may be pushing against systems you don't see. You may be making decisions based on frames you didn't choose. You may be pursuing paths that were never aligned with your actual goals, only with what was presented to you as desirable. This creates a subtle form of misalignment. You move forward, but not in a direction you consciously designed. Regaining control starts with awareness. The goal is not to eliminate influence. That is impossible. You will always be influenced by something. The goal is to become aware of it, to recognize what is shaping your thinking, what is guiding your decisions, what structures you are operating within. Because once you see these elements, you gain the ability to question them. And once you question them, you begin to choose more deliberately. A more accurate definition of control. Control is not absolute independence. It is not the absence of influence. Control is the ability to recognize the forces acting on you, decide which ones to accept, and which ones to reject. It is not about escaping structure. It is about understanding it well enough to move within it consciously. The second shift. When you begin to see the illusion of control, something changes. You become less reactive, less easily guided by surface-level signals, less dependent on what is presented to you. You start to create space between what you feel and what you choose. And in that space, real control begins to emerge, not as a feeling, but as a capability. Closing insight. You are always choosing, but your choices are always shaped. The difference between being influenced and being controlled lies in one thing: awareness. Chapter 3. Power is a system, not a trait. One of the biggest misconceptions about power is the belief that it belongs to certain types of people. People assume power is tied to personality, to charisma, to confidence, to natural dominance. They look at influential individuals and conclude they were simply born that way. But this interpretation misses something important. What appears to be personal power is often structural power, and structure is built. The myth of the naturally powerful person. From a distance, powerful people often seem effortless. They walk into rooms with confidence. People listen when they speak. Opportunities appear around them naturally. It creates the illusion that power is a trait, something internal and fixed. But when you look closer, you notice something else. Their influence is supported by invisible systems. Their reputation, their network, their positioning, their timing, their environment, their perceived value. None of these elements exist in isolation. Together, they create a structure that amplifies the individual inside it. This is why the same person can appear powerful in one environment and almost invisible in another. The trait did not change. The structure did. A person alone has limited power. Power does not exist independently. It requires context. A title only matters if people recognize it. Status only matters if others respond to it. Authority only works if systems reinforce it. Without structure, even strong individuals lose influence quickly. This is why relying only on personality is unstable. Charisma may attract attention temporarily. Confidence may create a strong first impression. But neither guarantees long-term influence. Eventually, structure always becomes the deciding factor. Systems amplify influence. Think about how influence grows in the modern world. A message from an unknown person may go unnoticed. The exact same message from someone established can spread instantly. Why? Not because the message changed. Because the system around the message changed. The audience changed. The credibility changed. The perception changed. The system amplified the voice. This applies everywhere: business, politics, social dynamics, media, relationships. People often focus on visible behavior while ignoring the systems supporting it. But systems determine reach. Systems determine momentum. Systems determine how much force is needed to create an outcome. The difference between force and structure. When people lack structure, they rely on force. They push harder, speak louder, demand attention, over-explain themselves. This creates friction. Because force is expensive, it requires constant energy to maintain. Structure is different. Structure reduces resistance. Instead of forcing outcomes repeatedly, it creates conditions where outcomes become more likely naturally. A respected leader does not need to constantly remind people of their authority. The structure already reinforces it. This is one of the clearest signs of real power. The less energy required to produce an effect, the stronger the structure behind it. Why some people advance faster. At first glance, life can seem unfair. Two people work equally hard. One advances rapidly, while the other struggles. Most explanations focus only on talent or luck. But often, the real difference is structural positioning. One person is connected to better systems, better environments, better networks, better visibility, better timing, better leverage. This does not mean effort is meaningless. It means effort multiplies differently, depending on the structure surrounding it. A weak structure absorbs effort. A strong structure compounds it. Power is built through layers. No powerful structure appears overnight. It develops gradually through accumulation. Small advantages stack over time. Reputation, trust, consistency, strategic relationships, specialized knowledge, emotional control, visibility. Individually, these elements may seem minor. Together, they create reinforcement. This is how influence becomes durable. Not through one dramatic moment, but through layers that support each other over time. Why people focus on traits instead of systems. Traits are easier to notice. You can immediately see confidence, charm, or communication skills. Systems are harder to detect because they operate in the background. People see the speaker. They do not see the years of positioning behind the speaker. They see success. They do not see the network, timing, and leverage supporting it. As a result, many people imitate visible traits while ignoring invisible systems. They copy tone instead of building credibility. They copy behavior instead of building leverage. This creates shallow influence, something that appears strong briefly but collapses under pressure. The most powerful structures become invisible. When a system works extremely well, it stops looking like a system. It starts looking natural. People assume influence is automatic. Authority appears effortless. Respect seems spontaneous, but what they are witnessing is the result of reinforcement repeated over time. Strong structures hide themselves through consistency. This is why true power often appears calm. The structure is carrying the weight. You are already inside systems. Whether you realize it or not, your current life is shaped by systems. The environments you enter, the people around you, the expectations attached to you, the opportunities available to you. All of these elements create a structure that either expands your influence or limits it. And many people spend years trying to change outcomes without changing the systems producing those outcomes. This rarely works for long, because systems eventually overpower isolated effort. The third shift. Once you understand that power is systemic, your thinking changes completely. You stop asking, "How do I appear powerful?" and begin asking, "What structures am I building?" You become more aware of environment, association, reputation, leverage, positioning. You realize that sustainable influence is not performed. It is constructed. Closing insight. Traits may attract attention, but systems determine outcomes. And those who understand systems no longer chase power randomly. They build structures that generate it naturally. Part 2. Foundations of Power. Chapter 4. Positioning. Most people focus on effort. They try to work harder, speak better, improve faster, and push themselves beyond their limits. And while effort matters, it is often applied in the wrong place. Because in many situations, your position determines your outcome long before your effort does. Where you stand shapes what opportunities you can see, who can see you, what becomes accessible to you, and how much resistance you face. This is the hidden force behind many forms of success and influence. Positioning. The wrong environment can neutralize talent. A capable person in the wrong environment often appears average, not because they lack intelligence or potential, but because the structure around them does not reward their strengths. Their ideas go unnoticed. Their abilities remain underused. Their growth slows down. Over time, they begin to question themselves. But the issue is not always capability. Sometimes it is placement. This is one of the most important truths about power. Environment can amplify you or suppress you. And many people spend years trying to improve themselves while remaining in structures that continuously diminish their value. Position changes. Perception. The same person can be perceived very differently depending on context. In one room, they are ignored. In another, they are respected immediately. What changed? Position. People often think perception is purely personal, but perception is heavily influenced by association and context. Where you are seen matters. Who you are connected to matters. What environments validate you matters. A recommendation from the right person can instantly shift how others see you. Association with respected environments can raise perceived value without a single word being spoken. This is not manipulation. It is how social perception naturally works. Power gathers in certain places. Not all environments carry equal influence. Some places concentrate opportunity, attention, information, resources, decision makers. Others do not. This is why certain cities, industries, networks, and communities produce disproportionate levels of influence. Power tends to gather around concentration, and those positioned near concentrated influence naturally gain advantages: faster access, better timing, stronger connections, greater visibility. Meanwhile, those outside these environments often need far more effort to create the same result. Proximity changes. Possibility. Many opportunities are not discovered. They are absorbed through proximity. You hear the right conversation. You meet the right person casually. You become aware of possibilities others never encounter. This is why proximity matters so much. The closer you are to capable people, ambitious environments, valuable information, high standards, the more your own thinking begins to shift. Your perception expands. What once felt impossible starts to feel normal. And once something feels normal, pursuing it becomes easier. Most people underestimate strategic placement. People often think positioning is accidental. They assume successful individuals simply ended up in the right places. But intentional positioning is one of the oldest forms of power. Powerful people think carefully about which rooms they enter, which rooms they avoid, what they attach their name to, where they invest attention and time, because they understand something important. Your environment influences your trajectory quietly, not instantly, but continuously. And over time, small directional shifts create completely different outcomes. You become legible through positioning. Positioning also determines how clearly people understand you. If your strengths are hidden in the wrong environment, others may never recognize them. This creates friction. You constantly need to explain yourself, prove yourself, or fight for recognition. Strong positioning reduces this friction. It places you where your value becomes obvious. The goal is not to convince everyone. The goal is to position yourself where the right people understand your value naturally. Why some people always seem lucky. Luck often appears around good positioning, not because luck is fake, but because positioning increases the probability of favorable outcomes. The right environment creates more exposure, more interactions, more opportunities, more visibility. This naturally increases the chances of breakthrough moments. From the outside, it looks effortless. But beneath that appearance is strategic placement repeated consistently over time. Bad positioning creates exhaustion. When you are badly positioned, everything requires excessive effort. You constantly push for attention, explain your value, fight resistance, chase opportunities manually. This drains energy. Not because you are weak, but because the structure surrounding you creates friction at every level. Many people mistake this exhaustion for personal failure. In reality, they are trying to grow inside environments that cannot support their growth. Position before performance. One of the biggest mistakes people make is obsessing over performance before positioning. They try to optimize skills while ignoring the structure around those skills. But a moderately skilled person in a powerful position can outperform a highly skilled person in a weak position. This is uncomfortable to admit, yet it explains much of the imbalance people observe in the world. Position determines exposure. Exposure determines opportunity. Opportunity compounds skill. This does not make skill unimportant. It means skill reaches its full value only when properly positioned. Strategic questions. As your understanding of power deepens, your questions begin to change. Instead of asking, "How do I work harder?" you begin asking, "Am I in the right environment? Who am I surrounded by? What structures am I connected to? Where does my value become visible?" These questions create clarity, and clarity changes direction, the quiet power of repositioning. Sometimes the most powerful move is not improving yourself further. It is repositioning yourself entirely, changing environments, changing associations, changing the rooms you spend time in. A new position can unlock parts of you that remained invisible for years. Because potential is not only personal, it is contextual. Closing insight. People often believe power comes from pushing harder, but many breakthroughs happen the moment resistance decreases, and resistance decreases when positioning improves. The right structure does not eliminate effort, it multiplies it. Chapter 5. Perception. Reality matters, but in human interaction, perception often matters first. People do not respond only to what is true. They respond to what feels credible, valuable, trustworthy, powerful, or familiar. And those perceptions shape behavior long before objective reality is fully understood. This is one of the most important principles of influence. People experience you through interpretation before they experience you through truth. The mind is always interpreting. Every interaction contains silent evaluation. Before a single sentence is fully processed, people are already interpreting your presence, your confidence, your emotional state, your status, your credibility. This happens automatically. Human beings are constantly searching for signals, not because they are irrational, but because interpretation helps simplify complexity. The mind creates conclusions quickly. Is this person competent? Should I trust them? Should I pay attention? Do they belong here? These judgments often occur within seconds, and once formed, they become difficult to reverse. Perception shapes opportunity. Two individuals may possess equal intelligence, skill, or capability, yet one receives more trust, more attention, and more opportunity. Why? Because perception affects access. People invest in what appears valuable. They listen to what appears credible. They follow what appears stable and certain. This does not mean perception is fake. It means perception acts as a filter through which reality is experienced. Before people discover your actual value, they encounter the signals surrounding you. Signals speak before words. Everything communicates. The way you speak, the way you move, the way you present yourself, the way others respond to you. Even silence communicates. Many people underestimate how much meaning is attached to small signals. Calmness can signal confidence. Desperation can signal weakness. Composure can signal authority. Insecurity can signal uncertainty. Often, people are not reacting to your words directly. They are reacting to what your behavior implies beneath the words. The power of emotional framing. Perception is heavily influenced by emotional framing. The same situation can appear completely different depending on how it is presented. A challenge can feel like an opportunity. A delay can feel strategic instead of accidental. Silence can feel powerful or uncomfortable. The interpretation changes the emotional response. This is why framing matters. Those who control framing influence how situations are experienced. And in many cases, perception becomes reality because people act according to what they believe is true, not necessarily what is objectively true. People look for social proof. Human beings rarely evaluate everything independently. Instead, they often rely on social signals to determine value. If others respect you, people become more likely to respect you. If others trust you, people become more likely to trust you. This is not weakness, it is efficiency. The mind uses collective perception as a shortcut. This is why reputation is powerful. Reputation creates expectations before interaction begins, and expectations shape behavior. Status is often communicated indirectly. Most status is communicated subtly, not through declarations, but through signals. The ability to remain calm under pressure. The ability to speak without seeking approval. The ability to move without over-explaining. High status rarely chases validation openly, because people often associate emotional stability with authority. Meanwhile, constant self-justification can unintentionally communicate insecurity. This is why perception is shaped not only by what you display, but by what you appear to need. The danger of misaligned signals. Sometimes people unknowingly communicate the opposite of what they intend. They try too hard to appear important and create discomfort instead. They overtalk to prove intelligence and reduce their clarity. They seek approval so visibly that they weaken their authority. This happens because perception responds strongly to emotional energy. Neediness is often felt before it is identified consciously. So is confidence. So is tension. So is certainty. People may not explain these reactions logically, but they respond to them instinctively. Perception compounds over time. Perception is not built through one moment alone. It accumulates through consistency. Repeated signals create identity. Over time, people begin to associate you with certain qualities: reliable, unstable, thoughtful, reactive, disciplined, uncertain. Eventually, these associations become your perceived identity within a group or environment. And once a perception stabilizes, people begin interpreting your future behavior through that lens. This is why reputation becomes difficult to change quickly. The mind protects established narratives. Visibility changes interpretation. The more visible you become, the more perception matters. Because people increasingly respond to the idea of you, not just the reality of you. This creates both opportunity and risk. Positive perception can amplify influence rapidly. Negative perception can create resistance before you even speak. Those who understand power recognize that visibility without perception management becomes dangerous, because attention magnifies interpretation. Perception is not about pretending. At this point, perception can sound manipulative if misunderstood. But authentic perception is not about creating a false image. It is about understanding that people interpret constantly. Signals shape interpretation, and perception influences outcomes, whether you acknowledge it or not. Ignoring perception does not free you from it. It simply means you are leaving interpretation uncontrolled. The goal is not deception. The goal is alignment between your actions, your values, your presence, and the signals you consistently send. The shift from reaction to awareness. Once you understand perception, you stop moving unconsciously. You become more aware of what your behavior communicates, how environments frame you, how emotional energy affects interpretation. You realize influence is not only verbal. Often, the strongest signals are unspoken: perception and reality. Over time, perception can begin shaping reality itself. A person perceived as capable receives more opportunities to prove capability. A person perceived as unreliable receives fewer chances. Eventually, perception creates conditions that reinforce itself. This is why perception matters so deeply in structures of power. Not because perception replaces reality, but because perception often determines which realities become accessible. Closing insight. People do not interact with you objectively. They interact with their interpretation of you. And those who understand perception understand something critical. Influence begins before explanation. Chapter 6. Leverage. Effort matters, but effort alone does not explain power. If it did, the hardest working people would always rise the fastest. The world would reward intensity fairly and consistently. Outcomes would reflect energy alone. But reality does not work that way. Some people create massive results with relatively little force. Others expend enormous effort for minimal movement. The difference is often leverage. Leverage is one of the most important forces in the architecture of power, because it changes the relationship between input and outcome. It allows small actions to create disproportionate effects. What is leverage? Leverage is anything that increases the impact of your effort. It allows you to produce more influence, more reach, more value, or more results without increasing force proportionally. This can take many forms: knowledge, skills, networks, technology, reputation, systems, capital, audience, positioning. Each form of leverage multiplies capacity. Without leverage, progress depends mostly on direct effort. With leverage, outcomes begin to scale. The difference between linear and exponential growth. Most people operate linearly. They trade time directly for results: more hours, more energy, more output. This approach has limits. The body becomes exhausted. Attention weakens. Time runs out. Leverage changes this dynamic. A single valuable skill can create opportunities repeatedly. A strong network can open doors continuously. A respected reputation can generate trust before interaction even begins. Instead of starting from zero each time, leverage compounds. This is where power begins to accelerate. Information is leverage. One of the oldest forms of power is information. Not just possessing information, but possessing useful information before others do. Knowing where opportunity is moving, how systems operate, what people value, what others fail to notice, creates asymmetry, and asymmetry creates advantage. This is why powerful individuals and institutions protect information carefully, because information changes decisions, and decisions shape outcomes. Relationships multiply reach. No one scales influence entirely alone. Relationships act as force multipliers. A single connection can create opportunities, increase visibility, transfer credibility, accelerate trust, expand access. This is why networks matter so deeply. Not because networking itself is magical, but because human systems operate through connection. Power flows through relationships. And those who understand this stop viewing relationships as transactions. They begin seeing them as structures. Skills become leverage when they scale. Not all skills create equal leverage. Some skills remain limited to direct effort. Others continue producing value long after the initial action. A skill that influences many people simultaneously scales differently from a skill applied one person at a time. Communication scales, systems thinking scales, leadership scales, technology scales, media scales. The more scalable the skill, the more leverage it creates. This is why certain individuals can influence millions, while others struggle to influence a single room. The structure supporting the skill determines its reach. Leverage reduces dependence on force. People without leverage often compensate with intensity. They push harder because they lack multiplication. This creates exhaustion. Meanwhile, leveraged individuals focus less on force and more on positioning systems correctly. Instead of repeating effort endlessly, they build structures that continue working: audiences, reputations, businesses, systems, communities, intellectual property. Over time, These structures begin producing outcomes with decreasing friction. This is one of the clearest signs of advanced power. Results continue even when direct effort pauses. The hidden advantage of reputation. Reputation is a form of leverage many people underestimate. A trusted reputation shortens the distance between introduction and opportunity. People become more willing to listen, collaborate, invest, recommend, support. Trust reduces resistance, and reduced resistance increases speed. This is why credibility compounds so powerfully over time. A strong reputation creates momentum that continuously amplifies future actions. Technology changed the nature of leverage. In previous centuries, leverage was often limited to institutions, governments, or wealthy individuals. Today, technology has redistributed leverage dramatically. One person can build an audience globally, distribute ideas instantly, create scalable systems, influence markets and communities. This creates unprecedented opportunity, but it also creates new forms of competition. Attention itself has become leverage, and those who understand how to direct attention now possess influence that once required entire institutions. Why some people stay trapped. Many people remain trapped in cycles of effort because they never transition from labor to leverage. They focus only on working harder, doing more, staying busy. But busyness is not power. Without leverage, effort remains fragile. The moment energy disappears, outcomes stop. This is why true power requires building systems beyond immediate action. Otherwise, life becomes an endless exchange of effort for survival. Leverage is not always visible. Some of the strongest forms of leverage are invisible externally. Calm emotional control is leverage. Clarity under pressure is leverage. The ability to remain disciplined while others react emotionally is leverage. Because these qualities influence decision-making consistently over time. People often imagine leverage only in financial or technological terms. But internal leverage matters just as much. A person who can think clearly while others panic already possesses advantage. Power multiplies through combination. The strongest leverage emerges when multiple forms combine. For example, skill plus audience, reputation plus positioning, capital plus information, emotional control plus strategic thinking. Each layer strengthens the others. Eventually, power becomes self-reinforcing. Opportunities create more opportunities. Visibility creates more visibility. Access creates more access. This is how influence expands rapidly once foundational structures are established. The shift from effort to architecture. Once you understand leverage, your mindset changes. You stop asking, "How can I do more?" and begin asking, "How can I build systems that multiply my effort?" You begin thinking structurally. What compounds over time? What creates momentum? What continues producing value after the initial action? This shift is critical, because power grows fastest when effort becomes amplified through structure. Leverage requires patience. Most leverage is slow at first. A reputation takes time. An audience takes time. A network takes time. Mastery takes time. In the beginning, progress may feel invisible, but once leverage compounds, growth accelerates rapidly. This is why many people quit too early. They stop during the phase where structures are still forming. They mistake delayed momentum for failure. Closing insight. Force creates temporary movement. Leverage creates lasting momentum. And those who understand leverage stop relying only on effort. They build systems capable of carrying effort further than force alone ever could. Chapter 7. Speaking without forcing. Many people misunderstand influence. They assume influence comes from dominance, speaking louder, talking more, overwhelming resistance, constantly proving authority. But force and influence are not the same thing. In fact, the more someone relies on force in conversation, the more they often reveal weakness beneath the surface. Because true influence rarely feels aggressive, it feels natural. The need to force creates resistance. Human beings resist pressure instinctively. The moment people feel pushed, controlled, or cornered, they begin protecting their autonomy. Even if the message is correct, excessive force creates internal resistance. This is why many people fail socially despite having good ideas. They over-explain, oversell, over-defend, over-talk. Their communication carries tension, and tension changes how words are received. People respond not only to information, but to emotional energy. Calmness signals control. One of the strongest social signals is calmness. A calm person appears more stable, more confident, more emotionally secure. Why? Because emotional control implies internal control. People unconsciously associate composure with authority. Meanwhile, frantic communication often signals uncertainty, even when the content itself is intelligent. This is why influence is often connected to pacing. Those who control the pace of interaction frequently control the emotional atmosphere surrounding it. Speaking less increases weight. Words lose power when they become excessive. People who speak constantly often reduce the perceived value of what they say. Their communication feels impulsive rather than intentional. Meanwhile, measured speech creates contrast. When someone speaks selectively, attention increases, anticipation increases, perceived clarity increases, silence creates space, and space gives words weight. This is one reason powerful communicators rarely rush to fill every silence. They understand that constant explanation weakens presence. The strongest communicators rarely chase agreement. Many people communicate with hidden neediness. They seek approval beneath their words, hoping to be validated, hoping to be accepted, hoping to avoid disagreement. This subtly changes their tone. They soften certainty unnecessarily, over-justifying themselves, adjust constantly to avoid tension. As a result, their communication loses stability. Influential people are different. They remain open, but grounded. They do not desperately need immediate agreement to maintain composure. And this emotional independence creates gravity. Tone often matters more than content. People remember emotional experience more than exact wording. You can communicate a strong idea poorly and create rejection. You can communicate a difficult truth calmly and create openness. Tone shapes interpretation. A relaxed tone reduces defensiveness. A controlled tone increases trust. An emotionally reactive tone creates instability. This is why influence depends heavily on emotional regulation. If your emotional state controls your communication becomes inconsistent, and inconsistency weakens authority. Questions create more influence than commands. Direct control often creates resistance. Questions create participation. When people arrive at conclusions internally, they experience those conclusions as their own. This creates deeper alignment. Instead of forcing belief, influential communicators guide attention. What do you think happens if this continues? Why do you think people respond that way? What would change if you approached this differently? Questions shift thinking without triggering immediate defense. This is subtle influence. People respond to emotional certainty. Certainty is persuasive, not because certainty guarantees truth, but because uncertainty creates instability. This does not mean pretending to know everything. False certainty eventually collapses. But grounded clarity creates trust. People naturally move toward individuals who appear internally stable during uncertainty, especially in moments of confusion, fear, or pressure. This is why emotional steadiness becomes socially influential. Calmness communicates. I can hold pressure without collapsing, and people are drawn toward that energy instinctively. Over-explaining weakens positioning. One of the most common communication mistakes is over-explaining. People often believe more explanation equals more persuasion. Usually, the opposite happens. Excessive explanation can signal insecurity, fear of misunderstanding, fear of rejection, lack of confidence in the original point. This creates subtle imbalance. Strong communicators trust silence enough to let ideas settle. They understand that influence does not require exhausting every possible argument. Sometimes clarity becomes weaker the longer it continues. Emotional control is conversational power. Conversations are emotional environments, and the person who maintains emotional control often shapes the interaction indirectly. If someone becomes reactive easily, others can destabilize them. If someone remains grounded, they become difficult to manipulate emotionally. This creates quiet authority, not dominance through aggression, but stability through control. And over time, emotional stability becomes one of the most respected forms of social power. The ability to listen is rare. Most people listen while preparing their response. They are waiting for their turn to speak, rather than fully observing the other person. But deep listening creates advantage, because people reveal motivations, insecurities, desires, priorities, emotional patterns when they feel heard. Those who listen carefully gain information others miss, and information always strengthens influence. Influence without pressure. The strongest influence often feels effortless because it avoids direct force. It creates movement through clarity, emotional control, pacing, framing, strategic silence. Instead of overpowering people, it lowers resistance naturally. This is why calm communicators frequently outperform aggressive communicators long-term. Force may create immediate compliance, but trust creates lasting influence. The shift from performance to presence. At first, many people treat communication like performance. They focus excessively on sounding impressive, appearing dominant, controlling perception constantly. But real influence emerges when communication becomes grounded rather than performative. Presence becomes more powerful than performance. People feel authenticity when someone is not desperately managing every interaction. And paradoxically, this creates stronger authority. Speaking with intention. Intentional communication is selective. It understands when to speak, when to pause, when to remain silent, when to ask, when to let tension exist without rushing to remove it. This level of awareness changes social dynamics completely. Because communication is no longer reactive, it becomes deliberate. Closing insight. People often assume influence belongs to the loudest voice, but lasting influence usually belongs to the most emotionally stable voice in the room. The one that does not force, the one that does not chase, the one that remains composed while others rush to prove themselves. Chapter 8. Strategic Visibility. Visibility creates influence, but uncontrolled visibility destroys it. This is one of the contradictions many people fail to understand. They assume that more exposure automatically means more power, more posting, more talking, more attention, more presence everywhere. But attention alone is not authority, and excessive visibility often reduces perceived value instead of increasing it. Because power is not only about being seen, it is about how, when, and why you are seen. Attention changes behavior. The moment people become visible, something psychological happens. They begin reacting to the audience. Instead of acting intentionally, they start performing. They monitor responses constantly: approval, criticism, engagement, validation. Over time, this creates dependency. The need to remain visible becomes stronger than the need to remain grounded. And once visibility controls behavior, influence becomes unstable. Scarcity increases value. Human attention works differently when access is limited. What is constantly available often loses emotional weight. What appears selectively gains importance. This principle exists everywhere: luxury, leadership, art, communication, relationships. Scarcity increases perceived value because the mind associates rarity with significance. This does not mean disappearing artificially. It means understanding that constant exposure reduces impact. Presence becomes stronger when it feels intentional rather than excessive. Overexposure creates familiarity without respect. Familiarity is not always beneficial. When people become too exposed, others begin consuming them casually rather than attentively. Their words lose distinction. Their presence loses gravity. Their image becomes ordinary. This is why some individuals gain attention rapidly, yet lose authority over time. They remain visible, but no longer carry weight. Visibility without restraint eventually creates saturation, and saturation weakens perception. Strategic absence creates contrast. Absence changes perception. When someone is constantly present, their absence means nothing. When someone appears selectively, their presence gains attention naturally. This creates contrast. Strategic absence allows anticipation to build, curiosity to develop, emotional reset to occur. It prevents perception from becoming dull through repetition. This is why many powerful individuals understand the importance of withdrawal, not as avoidance, but as control over exposure. Visibility should support positioning. Not all attention is useful. Some forms of visibility weaken positioning instead of strengthening it. Attention that creates confusion damages clarity. Attention disconnected from value creates instability. Attention driven only by controversy becomes difficult to sustain. Strategic visibility aligns exposure with identity. It reinforces credibility, perception, positioning, authority. Instead of chasing every opportunity for attention, powerful individuals protect the coherence of how they are perceived. Because inconsistent visibility creates fragmented identity. The modern attention trap. Modern systems reward constant visibility. Algorithms favor frequency. Social platforms reward activity. The digital world encourages continuous exposure. This creates pressure to always remain present. But there is a hidden cost. Constant exposure can weaken emotional stability, clarity, intentionality, self-perception. Eventually, people begin shaping themselves around audience reaction rather than internal direction. This creates dependence disguised as influence. And dependence is incompatible with real power. Mystery creates psychological space. People are drawn toward what they do not fully understand. Complete transparency removes imagination. Mystery, when natural, creates psychological space for perception to expand. This is why restraint can increase presence. When every thought, emotion, and reaction becomes public immediately, perception flattens. Nothing remains beneath the surface. But selective visibility creates depth. It allows people to feel there is more beyond what is shown, and depth increases intrigue. The most powerful people are often selective. Many highly influential individuals are not constantly accessible. They protect their attention, their energy, their visibility, their emotional exposure. This selectiveness communicates value indirectly, not because distance itself creates power, but because controlled access changes perception. Unlimited accessibility often lowers perceived importance. Selective accessibility reinforces positioning. The most powerful people are often selective. Many highly influential individuals are not constantly accessible. They protect their attention, their energy, their visibility, their emotional exposure. This selectiveness communicates value indirectly, not because distance itself creates power, but because controlled access changes perception. Unlimited accessibility often lowers perceived importance. Selective accessibility reinforces positioning. Visibility magnifies weaknesses too. Attention amplifies everything. Not only strengths, but instability, insecurity, inconsistency, and emotional reactivity. This is why visibility without internal discipline becomes dangerous. The more visible someone becomes, the more emotional control matters. The more consistency matters. The more clarity matters. Because public perception begins reinforcing every visible pattern repeatedly. Over time, small weaknesses become associated with identity itself. The difference between presence and noise. Many people confuse visibility with significance. But being constantly noticed is not the same as being deeply respected. Noise attracts temporary attention. Presence creates lasting impact. Noise seeks reaction. Presence shapes atmosphere. One disappears quickly. The other changes perception over time. This is why powerful visibility often feels calm rather than desperate. It does not chase attention constantly. It directs attention intentionally, knowing when not to appear. One of the most underrated forms of control is knowing when not to engage. Not every argument deserves response. Not every criticism deserves attention. Not every opportunity deserves visibility. People who react to everything lose control over their own focus. Strategic restraint protects positioning. Sometimes, silence communicates more confidence than defense ever could. Protecting internal identity. Constant visibility creates another danger. You can begin performing an identity instead of living authentically. The audience starts shaping behavior. External reaction begins influencing internal direction. Over time, this disconnect creates instability. This is why grounded individuals maintain separation between who they are and what they present publicly. Without this separation, visibility slowly consumes identity. Visibility should expand influence, not replace it. Visibility is a tool, not a substitute for substance. Without structure beneath it, visibility becomes fragile. Perception becomes unstable, influence fades quickly. But when visibility is supported by value, clarity, leverage, emotional stability, positioning, it becomes amplification, and amplification is powerful. Closing insight. The goal is not to be seen constantly. The goal is to be remembered meaningfully, because real influence is not built through endless exposure, but through controlled presence that carries weight when it appears. Chapter 9. Creating Dependence. Dependence is often viewed negatively. People associate it with control, manipulation, or emotional weakness. They imagine one person dominating another through pressure or psychological force. But not all dependence is unhealthy. In reality, human life is built on forms of dependence. We depend on systems, relationships, trust, expertise, stability, cooperation. No one operates completely alone. The question is not whether dependence exists. The question is, what kind of dependence are you creating around yourself? Power grows through value. The most stable form of influence comes from becoming genuinely valuable, not loudly impressive, not aggressively dominant, valuable. When people consistently associate you with clarity, reliability, emotional stability, insight, solutions, opportunity, your influence deepens naturally, because human beings move toward what improves their experience of life. This creates a form of dependence, not through force, but through trust. People return to stability. One of the strongest forms of influence is emotional consistency. Most people live in emotional unpredictability, stress, confusion, insecurity, reactive environments. As a result, emotionally grounded individuals become psychologically valuable. People trust those who remain stable under pressure, not because perfection is expected, but because consistency creates safety. Over time, people begin associating your presence with emotional order rather than emotional chaos, and that association becomes powerful. The difference between control and reliance. Manipulation seeks control through weakness. Healthy influence creates reliance through value. This difference matters deeply. Manipulative control reduces autonomy, creates fear, depends on instability. Ethical influence increases clarity, creates trust, strengthens capability. One weakens people to maintain power. The other becomes valuable because it contributes something meaningful. This distinction defines the integrity of influence. Competence creates dependence. Naturally, people naturally rely on competence. If someone repeatedly solves problems effectively, trust builds around them. This applies everywhere: leadership, business, relationships, creative work, communication. Reliability creates psychological gravity. Others begin thinking, this person understands. This person can handle pressure. This person brings clarity. Over time, competence becomes a form of leverage because people prefer certainty over instability. Emotional dependence is powerful and dangerous. One of the strongest forms of influence is emotional dependence. The feeling that someone provides validation, emotional relief, identity reinforcement, stability. This creates intense attachment. But this is also where influence can become destructive if used irresponsibly. When someone intentionally creates emotional instability to increase attachment, power becomes manipulation. Fear replaces trust. Confusion replaces clarity. This may create short-term control, but it destroys long-term integrity. Real power does not require weakening others emotionally. People depend on what feels rare. Value increases when qualities become uncommon. In a reactive world, calmness becomes valuable. Honesty becomes valuable. Clarity becomes valuable. Reliability becomes valuable. Scarcity creates importance. This is why certain individuals become deeply influential without forcing attention. They consistently provide what most environments lack: and people remember environments and individuals that reduce internal friction. Influence deepens through consistency. Trust is built through repeated alignment. When your actions consistently match your signals, people relax around you. Resistance decreases, confidence increases. Predictability in character creates stability. This does not mean becoming emotionally flat or robotic. It means remaining coherent. People should not constantly wonder who you are today, what version of you will appear, whether your values shift under pressure. Consistency strengthens influence because it reduces uncertainty. The need to be needed. Many people secretly crave dependence from others, not because they want to help, but because they fear losing importance. This creates unhealthy dynamics. They begin solving problems others should solve themselves, creating emotional reliance unnecessarily, positioning themselves as indispensable. At first, this can feel powerful, but eventually it creates fragility. Because power built on dependency alone often requires others to remain weak, and anything that requires weakness to survive is unstable. The strongest influence creates strength, not weakness. Healthy power improves the people around it. It creates clarity, confidence, capability, direction, not helplessness. This is an important principle, because true influence does not trap people. It elevates them. The strongest leaders, thinkers, and creators increase the capacity of others rather than reducing it. And paradoxically, this creates deeper loyalty and respect. People trust those who genuinely strengthen them. Becoming associated with value. One of the most effective ways to build lasting influence is simple. Become consistently associated with something meaningful. When people think of you, what emotional or practical association appears? Calmness, insight, opportunity, discipline, creativity, stability. Over time, repeated association becomes identity, and identity shapes influence automatically. This is why branding, personal or professional, is ultimately psychological. It creates consistent expectation. Trust reduces resistance. The more trust exists, the less force becomes necessary. People naturally resist uncertainty. Trust lowers defensive tension. This is why trustworthy individuals influence more easily. Not because they manipulate better, but because resistance decreases around them naturally. Influence flows more smoothly where fear is lower. Dependency on systems versus dependency on individuals. One of the highest forms of power is creating systems people rely on. Businesses, platforms, communities, frameworks, knowledge structures. Systems scale influence beyond personality. And unlike emotional dependence, systems can create value without requiring constant personal control. This is why institutions often outlast individuals, because systems create durable forms of reliance. The ethical test of power. A simple question reveals the integrity of influence. Does your influence leave people stronger or weaker? If influence creates fear, confusion, insecurity, helplessness, it eventually becomes corrosive. But if influence creates clarity, growth, confidence, capability, it becomes sustainable. And sustainability is one of the clearest signs of healthy power. Closing insight. The deepest forms of influence are rarely forced. They emerge when people associate you with value, stability, and trust. Because in a world filled with confusion and inconsistency, what remains reliable becomes powerful naturally. Part 4. Maintaining Power. Chapter 10. Boundaries and distance. Power is not only built through presence, it is also built through limitation. What you allow, what you tolerate, what people can access, how much of your time, attention, and emotional energy remains available. These invisible boundaries shape how others perceive and interact with you. And without them, influence slowly begins to weaken. Unlimited access reduces value. People often assume that being constantly available makes them more respected, appreciated, or loved. But unlimited access usually creates the opposite effect. When your attention becomes endlessly available, your presence loses distinction. Your time loses perceived value. Your energy becomes expected rather than appreciated. Familiarity without boundaries creates emotional erosion. Not because people are malicious, but because human beings naturally adapt to what becomes constantly accessible. Boundaries. Define identity. Every boundary communicates something. It signals what you prioritize, what you protect, what you will and will not accept. Without boundaries, identity becomes unstable. You begin adjusting constantly to the demands, emotions, and expectations of others. Over time, this creates fragmentation. Instead of moving intentionally, you become reactive, and reactive people lose control over their direction. The fear behind overavailability. Many people struggle to create boundaries because they fear disappointing others, creating tension, losing approval, appearing distant. So they overextend themselves. They say yes too often, respond too quickly, remain emotionally accessible at all times. At first, this may create temporary validation, but eventually it creates exhaustion, because every form of access consumes energy, and energy is finite. Attention is a resource. Your attention shapes your life. Whatever consistently receives your attention begins influencing your emotional state, your priorities, your thinking, your identity. This is why attention must be protected carefully. People who lack boundaries often lose control over where their attention goes. Other people's urgency becomes their urgency. Other people's emotions become their emotional environment. Over time, this weakens clarity, and clarity is essential for maintaining power. Distance creates perspective. Constant closeness reduces perspective. This applies to relationships, work, social environments, even self-perception. Distance allows observation. Without distance, emotional intensity can distort judgment. This is why emotionally disciplined people know when to step back, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as preservation of clarity. Respect often follows boundaries. People frequently respect those who respect themselves, and boundaries communicate self-respect indirectly. Someone who protects their time, their emotional energy, their focus, their standards, signals internal stability. Meanwhile, people who tolerate everything often teach others to undervalue them unintentionally. This does not mean becoming cold or inaccessible. It means understanding that respect requires structure, and boundaries are part of this structure. Emotional boundaries prevent manipulation. Without emotional boundaries, people become highly reactive to external pressure. Approval controls them, criticism destabilizes them, conflict consumes them. This creates vulnerability. Emotionally grounded individuals recognize that not every emotion belongs to them. They do not absorb every tension around them automatically. Instead, they create psychological separation, observing without collapsing, listening without internalizing everything, engaging without losing themselves. This separation creates resilience. Over-explaining weakens boundaries. People who struggle with boundaries often feel the need to justify every decision. They explain excessively to avoid guilt or discomfort. But constant justification weakens authority. Not every boundary requires detailed explanation. Sometimes clarity is enough. No, not now. That doesn't align with my priorities. Simple boundaries communicate confidence more effectively than defensive explanations. Distance increases perceived value. Selective access changes perception. This principle exists across nearly every form of influence. People value rare experiences, selective opportunities, intentional presence, because scarcity increases attention. When someone is emotionally and mentally present only when it matters, their presence carries greater weight. Meanwhile, constant availability can make even valuable people feel ordinary. Boundaries protect internal stability. One of the deepest purposes of boundaries is protecting your internal environment. Without protection, external chaos enters constantly. Opinions, demands, negativity, emotional instability, distraction. Over time, this creates mental fragmentation. Strong boundaries act like psychological architecture. They create conditions where focus, clarity, and emotional balance can survive. And without those conditions, power becomes difficult to maintain. Not everyone deserves equal access. This is an uncomfortable truth for many people. They want to believe openness should be unlimited. But equal access for everyone often creates imbalance. Different people affect your life differently. Some environments strengthen you, others drain you. Some people expand your thinking. Others create confusion and emotional instability. Awareness means recognizing these differences honestly and adjusting access accordingly. The difference between isolation and protection. Healthy distance is not isolation. Isolation disconnects. Protection creates selectivity. Powerful individuals are rarely disconnected from people entirely. Instead, they become intentional about who they allow close, where they invest energy, what environments shape them repeatedly. This intentionality preserves stability. Boundaries require discomfort. Many people understand boundaries intellectually, but fail to apply them emotionally. Why? Because boundaries create discomfort initially. Someone may become disappointed. Someone may react negatively. Someone may misunderstand you. But avoiding short-term discomfort often creates long-term exhaustion. And exhausted people struggle to maintain influence, clarity, or emotional control. Power requires preservation. Anything valuable must be protected. Attention, energy, focus, emotional stability. Without preservation, depletion becomes inevitable. This is why maintaining power is not only about growth, it is about sustainability. And sustainability depends heavily on what you refuse to allow. Closing insight. The ability to say no calmly is a form of power. The ability to create distance without guilt is a form of power. And the ability to protect your inner stability in a world demanding constant access may be one of the most important forms of power of all. Chapter 11. Navigating Power Games. Power does not exist only in obvious places. It exists quietly inside everyday interactions, conversations, workplaces, friendships, partnerships, social groups, institutions. Wherever human beings gather, hierarchy begins to form. Not always formally, not always intentionally, but naturally. People observe who influences decisions, who receives attention, who shapes direction, who holds emotional control. And once influence begins affecting outcomes, power dynamics emerge, whether acknowledged or not. Most power games are subtle. When people hear the phrase power game, they often imagine dramatic manipulation or open conflict. But most power struggles are quiet. A subtle dismissal, an attempt to interrupt authority, a strategic compliment, a shift in tone around certain people, a social exclusion, a challenge disguised as humor. These interactions often appear small individually, but collectively, they shape hierarchy and perception. This is why socially aware people pay attention not only to words, but to underlying intention and positioning. People constantly test boundaries. Human beings unconsciously test each other, not always maliciously. They test confidence, emotional control, boundaries, certainty, social positioning. Sometimes this happens through disagreement, sometimes through pressure, sometimes through subtle disrespect. The goal is often unconscious. How stable is this person? Emotionally reactive individuals reveal instability quickly. Grounded individuals remain composed, and composure changes social dynamics immediately. Emotional reactions reveal vulnerabilities. One of the fastest ways to lose control in a power dynamic is emotional impulsiveness. The moment someone can reliably predict your emotional reactions, they gain influence over your state. Anger, defensiveness, neediness, approval seeking. Each emotional pattern becomes readable over time. This is why emotional discipline matters so deeply. Not because emotions are weakness, but because unmanaged emotions reduce strategic clarity. Ego creates blindness. Ego distorts perception. It causes people to overestimate themselves, underestimate others, react emotionally to challenges, seek validation constantly. As a result, ego-driven individuals become predictable, and predictability reduces power. Many conflicts escalate unnecessarily because people feel psychologically threatened rather than objectively harmed. Their identity becomes attached to being right, respected, admired, or superior. This creates fragility beneath apparent confidence. The need to win every interaction. Some people approach every conversation as competition. They need the final word, visible dominance, constant recognition, intellectual superiority. At first, this may appear strong, but over time it creates tension and resistance, because secure individuals do not need to dominate every interaction to feel stable. In fact, one sign of confidence is the ability to disengage from unnecessary battles entirely. Hierarchy exists, even when people deny it. Many modern environments pretend hierarchy does not exist, but hierarchy continues operating beneath the surface. People naturally observe competence, emotional stability, confidence, influence, leadership capacity, and these observations shape informal structures. Some individuals become central, others become peripheral. Understanding hierarchy does not mean obsessing over status. It means recognizing that social systems organize themselves naturally around perceived value and influence. Ignoring this reality creates blindness. Power games often begin with insecurity. Many manipulative behaviors emerge from insecurity rather than strength. People attempt to diminish others, control perception, create emotional instability, seek superiority, because their internal position feels weak. Understanding this changes your reaction. Instead of becoming emotionally consumed by every challenge, you begin seeing the fear beneath certain behaviors, and awareness reduces emotional reactivity. The strongest position is often calm observation. Not every move requires response. This is one of the most important lessons in navigating power dynamics. Reactive people become emotionally trapped inside the game. Observant people remain psychologically above it. Observation creates advantage because it reveals motives, patterns, insecurities, emotional triggers, social structures. Most people reveal themselves over time if you stop reacting long enough to watch carefully. Manipulation depends on unconsciousness. Manipulation works best when people remain emotionally unaware. Pressure creates reaction. Reaction creates loss of clarity. This is why emotional awareness is protective. When you notice guilt pressure, emotional baiting, validation traps, fear-based influence, you create space between stimulus and reaction, and in that space, control returns. Social intelligence is not deception. There is an important distinction here. Understanding power dynamics does not mean becoming manipulative. It means becoming aware. Aware of emotional environments, hidden motivations, social pressure, hierarchy formation, perception shifts. Without awareness, people become easily influenced without realizing it. With awareness, interactions become clearer and more intentional. Some battles reduce your position. Not every conflict deserves engagement. Certain arguments waste energy, lower perception, create unnecessary emotional exposure. This is why strategic individuals choose conflict carefully. Winning the wrong battle can still weaken positioning. Sometimes restraint communicates more strength than confrontation, especially when the confrontation itself lacks value. Confidence without aggression. True confidence does not require intimidation constantly. People who are internally secure rarely need to humiliate others, dominate conversations, display superiority aggressively, because confidence grounded in structure remains stable without performance. Aggression is often compensation for instability. Calmness, meanwhile, usually reflects greater control. Reading the room matters. Every environment has emotional currents, unspoken alliances, invisible tensions, competing egos, social expectations. Social intelligence involves sensing these dynamics without becoming consumed by them. People who ignore the emotional structure of a room often create friction unintentionally. Those who observe carefully move more effectively because they understand the environment before acting within it. Protecting yourself without becoming paranoid. Awareness of power dynamics can become unhealthy if it turns into paranoia. Not every disagreement is manipulation. Not every criticism is an attack. Not every social tension is strategic. Balance matters. The goal is not suspicion toward everyone. The goal is clarity. Healthy awareness observes patterns calmly without becoming emotionally obsessive. Power games reveal character. Pressure exposes people. Over time, power dynamics reveal integrity, insecurity, discipline, emotional maturity, hidden ambition. This is why observing how people behave under tension tells you far more than observing them during comfort. Stress reveals structure. Closing insight. The most powerful person in a difficult environment is not always the loudest or most dominant. Often, it is the person who sees clearly, reacts slowly, remains emotionally grounded, and understands the game without becoming consumed by it. Because awareness without emotional control creates anxiety, but awareness with emotional control creates power. Chapter 12. The Discipline of Silence. Most people fear silence. They rush to fill it with words, explanations, reactions, opinions, or emotional noise. Silence feels uncomfortable because it removes distraction. In silence, tension becomes visible. Emotion becomes noticeable. Thought becomes unavoidable. And many people have never learned how to remain steady inside that space. But silence has power. Not because silence itself is magical, but because the ability to remain composed without constantly reacting reflects control. Silence reveals emotional stability. Reactive people struggle with silence. They feel the need to defend themselves immediately, explain every misunderstanding, respond to every criticism, fill every conversational gap. This urgency often reveals internal instability. Emotion is pulling behavior faster than awareness can regulate it. Calm individuals are different. They allow pauses. They tolerate tension. They think before reacting. And because of this, their communication feels deliberate rather than impulsive. The world rewards constant reaction. Modern systems encourage immediate expression. Everyone is expected to respond instantly, share opinions constantly, react publicly, remain emotionally visible at all times. This creates a culture of impulsiveness. Thought becomes secondary to reaction, but reaction is not power. In many cases, constant reaction weakens positioning because it communicates emotional dependence on external events. People who react to everything surrender control of their attention continuously. Silence creates observation. When you stop reacting immediately, something important happens. You begin seeing more. You notice emotional patterns, hidden intentions, inconsistencies, manipulation attempts, unspoken tension. Most people reveal themselves while trying to fill silence. They explain too much, expose insecurity, reveal motives unintentionally. Silence creates space for observation, and observation strengthens clarity. Not every thought needs expression. One of the greatest signs of emotional maturity is selective expression. Many people assume authenticity means expressing every emotion immediately. But emotional honesty is not the same as emotional impulsiveness. You can feel anger without broadcasting it instantly. You can feel hurt without surrendering control. You can disagree without reacting recklessly. The ability to hold emotion without immediate discharge creates psychological strength. Silence protects energy. Words consume energy. Arguments consume energy. Explanations consume energy. Defending yourself endlessly consumes energy. This is why emotionally reactive people often feel exhausted. They are constantly spending psychological energy responding to external stimulation. Silence interrupts this cycle. It creates recovery, perspective, internal space. And internal space is necessary for clear thinking. The need to be understood immediately. Many people struggle with silence because they fear misunderstanding. They want immediate clarity, immediate validation, immediate resolution, so they over-explain. But constant explanation often weakens authority. People who are deeply grounded do not panic when temporarily misunderstood. They trust consistency over frantic correction. This does not mean refusing communication. It means understanding that not every perception needs immediate control. Silence can be more powerful than defense. There are moments when responding emotionally lowers your position, not because you are wrong, but because emotional urgency changes perception. A calm silence can sometimes communicate confidence, emotional control, certainty, restraint, more effectively than endless defense ever could. This is especially true when dealing with provocation, manipulation, attention-seeking conflict. Reactive engagement often feeds the dynamic. Non-reaction changes it. Silence forces reflection. When you stop constantly speaking, you begin hearing yourself more clearly. Many people avoid silence because silence exposes internal noise. Without distraction, unresolved emotions become visible: insecurity, fear, loneliness, confusion, dependency on stimulation. But this discomfort is valuable, because awareness begins where distraction ends. Silence allows you to confront yourself honestly, and self-awareness strengthens internal control. Strategic silence in conversation. Silence changes conversational dynamics dramatically. A pause after a statement increases weight. A pause after a question creates pressure. A pause during tension reveals emotional stability. People uncomfortable with silence often rush to fill it, sometimes revealing more than intended. This is why skilled communicators use silence intentionally, not theatrically, but strategically. They understand that communication is shaped not only by words, but by space. Not reacting is different from suppressing. Silence should not become emotional suppression. Suppressing emotion without processing it creates internal pressure over time. The goal is not emotional numbness. The goal is conscious response. There is a difference between refusing to feel and refusing to react impulsively. Disciplined silence creates choice. Impulsive reaction removes it. Power often looks quiet. People frequently imagine powerful individuals as dominant, loud, and constantly expressive. But many deeply powerful people communicate with restraint. They observe carefully, speak intentionally, reveal selectively. This creates gravity, because emotional control naturally commands attention in emotionally chaotic environments. Silence becomes noticeable precisely because so few people are comfortable with it. The psychological effect of silence. Silence affects people differently depending on their emotional state. Secure individuals usually tolerate silence comfortably. Insecure individuals often rush to escape it. This is why silence can feel unsettling. It removes distraction and exposes emotional atmosphere directly. And in many situations, the person most comfortable with silence unconsciously gains psychological stability within the interaction. Knowing when to speak matters too. Silence is powerful, but permanent silence is avoidance. There are moments where speaking clearly matters deeply. Defending values, establishing boundaries, addressing important truth, protecting yourself or others. The goal is balance. Speak with intention. Remain silent with intention. Both become powerful when they are chosen consciously, rather than emotionally. The internal discipline of silence. The deepest form of silence is internal. It is the ability to pause before reacting. Observe emotion without obeying it instantly. Remain centered during pressure. Resist compulsive expression. This kind of silence creates strength because it restores separation between feeling and action. And in that separation, freedom begins. Closing insight. Silence is not weakness. In many cases, it is restraint under control, and the ability to remain calm, observant, and intentional in a world addicted to reaction may be one of the clearest signs of real power. Part 5. Breaking and Reclaiming Power. Chapter 13. How Power is Lost. Power is difficult to build, but it can disappear surprisingly fast. Not always through dramatic collapse, not always through obvious failure. Often, power erodes quietly. A shift in behavior, a loss of discipline, an unchecked ego, a gradual disconnection from reality. Over time, structures weaken from within long before collapse becomes visible externally. And this is what many people fail to understand. Power is not permanent. It requires maintenance. Success creates blindness. One of the greatest dangers of power is that success changes perception. When people experience repeated success, they often begin confusing structure with personal invincibility, momentum with permanence, admiration with truth. This creates overconfidence, and overconfidence reduces awareness. The very systems that once helped someone rise can become ignored because success creates the illusion that failure is no longer possible. But no structure is immune to neglect. Ego disconnects people from reality. Ego becomes dangerous when identity attaches itself to power. A person no longer sees themselves clearly. Instead, they begin protecting an image, superiority, importance, control, dominance. Over time, maintaining the image becomes more important than maintaining reality. This creates blindness. Criticism feels threatening instead of useful. Feedback becomes intolerable. Correction feels humiliating. As a result, ego isolates people from truth gradually, and isolation weakens judgment. The higher someone rises, the less honest feedback they receive. Power changes social behavior around a person. People become more careful, more agreeable, more strategic. Some seek approval. Some fear consequences. Some simply adapt to hierarchy. Eventually, powerful individuals may stop receiving honest feedback entirely. This creates distortion. Without accurate reflection, self-perception drifts further from reality. And when perception disconnects from reality long enough, collapse becomes more likely. Emotional instability destroys structures. Many forms of power collapse emotionally before they collapse externally. Impulsiveness, paranoia, arrogance, neediness, fear-driven decisions. These emotional shifts slowly damage trust, perception, and judgment. People may still appear powerful temporarily, but internally, the structure is weakening. Because sustainable power requires emotional regulation. Without emotional discipline, success amplifies instability instead of strengthening clarity. Overexposure weakens. Authority. Visibility creates opportunity, but excessive visibility creates erosion. The more exposed someone becomes, the more predictable they become, the more emotionally reactive they may grow, the more dependent they may become on attention itself. Eventually, attention stops feeling optional. And once someone psychologically depends on visibility, control begins shifting away from them. They no longer guide perception intentionally. They chase reaction compulsively. This creates fragility. Dependence reverses power. One of the clearest signs of weakening power is dependence. Dependence on approval, validation, emotional reassurance, public attention, external identity. The more someone needs these things emotionally, the easier they become to destabilize. Because anything you psychologically require gains influence over you. This is why internal stability matters so deeply. Without it, power slowly becomes reactive instead of intentional. Complacency is quiet destruction. Power often disappears gradually through comfort. Once people achieve success, many stop sharpening themselves. They stop observing carefully, stop adapting, stop questioning assumptions. At first, nothing seems wrong. Momentum continues carrying them temporarily, but reality changes constantly, and structures that stop evolving eventually weaken. Complacency is dangerous because it rarely feels dangerous while it is happening. Fear of loss creates irrational behavior. Ironically, people often lose power while trying desperately to protect it. Fear changes behavior. People become controlling, defensive, paranoid, emotionally reactive. Instead of moving from clarity, they begin moving from preservation anxiety. This weakens perception rapidly because fear-driven behavior communicates instability, and instability reduces trust. Power without self-awareness becomes fragile. External influence cannot compensate for internal blindness indefinitely. A person may possess status, wealth, visibility, authority. But without self-awareness, these structures eventually become unstable, because unexamined insecurity begins shaping decisions unconsciously, and unconscious behavior always leaks through over time. The danger of believing your own image. Public identity can become addictive. People begin interacting more with their image than with themselves. They protect perception constantly, perform confidence continuously, avoid vulnerability entirely. Eventually, they lose connection with reality beneath the image. This creates psychological exhaustion, because maintaining a false or inflated identity requires endless energy. And what requires endless maintenance eventually cracks under pressure. Isolation accelerates collapse. Many powerful individuals become isolated over time. Not physically, but psychologically. They trust fewer people, receive less honesty, experience more projection from others. Without grounded relationships, self-correction weakens. Isolation amplifies distortion because there are fewer stable reflections of reality, and reality eventually punishes distortion. The strongest structures stay adaptive. The most resilient forms of power remain flexible. They continue learning, continue observing, continue adjusting. They do not assume permanence. This humility protects structure, because awareness of vulnerability creates caution, and caution preserves stability. Losing power often begins internally. Before external collapse appears, internal shifts usually happen first. Discipline weakens. Ego expands. Emotional control decreases. Clarity fades. By the time external consequences appear, the deeper structural damage has often existed for years. This is why maintaining power requires continuous self-observation, not obsession. Awareness, power can corrupt perception. The more influence people gain, the easier it becomes to confuse attention with respect, fear with loyalty, compliance with trust. This distortion creates dangerous miscalculations, because people may appear loyal while quietly disconnecting emotionally. And structures built on fear eventually become unstable. True influence survives beyond pressure. False influence collapses once pressure disappears. The importance of internal grounding. External power without internal grounding becomes unstable eventually. The strongest individuals maintain connection to reality, discipline, reflection, self-awareness. They understand that power magnifies who you already are. If instability exists internally, power often amplifies it rather than fixing it. Closing insight. Power is rarely lost in one moment. It erodes through blindness, ego, emotional instability, and disconnection from reality. And those who wish to maintain influence must remember something essential. The greatest threat to power often comes from within the person holding it. Chapter 14. Breaking External Control. Most people believe control is obvious. They imagine it as force, restriction, or direct domination. They assume they would recognize it immediately if someone attempted to control them. But external control is rarely that visible. More often, it operates subtly, through emotion, through fear, through dependency, through identity, through repetition, through social pressure. And because these forces feel normal, people often remain inside them without realizing it. Control begins with influence over perception. The most effective control does not force behavior directly. It shapes perception. Because once perception changes, behavior follows naturally. If someone can influence what you fear, what you value, what you believe is possible, how you see yourself, they begin influencing your decisions indirectly. This is why controlling perception is more powerful than controlling action. Action can resist force, but people rarely resist what feels internally true. Fear is one of the oldest tools of control. Fear narrows thinking. When people are afraid, they become reactive, dependent, emotionally suggestible. Clarity decreases. Critical thinking weakens. Emotional urgency increases. This makes control easier. Fear does not need to be extreme to influence behavior. Even subtle fear can shape decisions. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of failure, fear of losing approval, fear of exclusion. Many people organize their entire lives around avoiding discomfort without realizing it, and avoidance creates vulnerability to influence. Dependency reduces autonomy. The more psychologically dependent someone becomes, the easier they are to control. Dependency can form around validation, emotional reassurance, identity, financial survival, social belonging, authority figures. Once a person believes their emotional stability depends entirely on something external, autonomy weakens. This does not mean connection is weakness. Human beings naturally rely on others, but healthy connection allows freedom. Control begins when fear of losing connection overrides independent thought. Repeated narratives become internal truth. One of the most powerful mechanisms of influence is repetition. What people hear repeatedly begins feeling normal. What feels normal eventually feels true. This applies to beliefs, identity, expectations, limitations. Over time, repeated messages shape internal reality, especially when those messages are emotionally reinforced by environment, culture, or authority. This is why awareness matters, because many inherited beliefs were never consciously chosen. Social pressure shapes behavior. Quietly, human beings deeply fear exclusion. As a result, people often adjust themselves unconsciously to maintain acceptance. They suppress thoughts, change behavior, adopt group beliefs, remain silent about disagreement. Not necessarily because they truly agree, but because belonging feels psychologically safer than isolation. This is one reason social systems can influence people so effectively. Most control is maintained through emotional pressure, not force. Manipulation often creates confusion. Healthy influence creates clarity. Confusion weakens confidence in personal judgment. People begin questioning their perception, their instincts, their memory, their emotional reactions. Once self-trust weakens, external influence strengthens. Because uncertainty creates dependence on outside interpretation. This is why psychological manipulation often relies on instability rather than direct coercion. Awareness creates separation. The moment you become aware of influence, something changes. You create psychological distance between what you feel and what you choose. This separation is powerful because unconscious influence depends on automatic reaction. Awareness interrupts automaticity. You begin asking, Why am I reacting this way? Is this belief actually mine? What emotion is shaping this decision? Who benefits from this fear? Questions restore clarity, and clarity weakens manipulation. Emotional regulation protects freedom. People who cannot regulate emotion become easier to control. Anger can be triggered. Fear can be exploited. Validation can be used as leverage. Emotional discipline creates resistance against manipulation because it reduces impulsive reaction. This does not mean becoming emotionally cold. It means remaining capable of thinking clearly while experiencing emotion. And clear thinking protects autonomy. Independent thought requires courage. Thinking independently sounds simple in theory. In reality, it often creates discomfort, because independent thought sometimes means disagreeing with the group, disappointing others, questioning authority, facing uncertainty alone. This is psychologically difficult. Many people prefer familiar illusion over uncomfortable truth because certainty feels emotionally safer. But autonomy requires willingness to tolerate discomfort. Without that willingness, conformity becomes automatic. Reclaiming power begins internally. External freedom means little without internal freedom. Someone may escape one controlling structure while remaining psychologically trapped by fear, insecurity, validation dependency, emotional impulsiveness. This is why reclaiming power is not only external, it is internal reconstruction. You rebuild self-trust, clarity, emotional stability, independent judgment. Without these foundations, external control simply changes form. You must learn to sit with uncertainty. Many forms of manipulation succeed because people desperately want certainty. Simple answers, clear villains, absolute reassurance. But reality is often complex. Those who tolerate uncertainty think more clearly because they are less emotionally desperate for immediate conclusions. This creates intellectual independence, and intellectual independence reduces susceptibility to influence. Control weakens when you observe instead of react. Manipulation depends heavily on emotional momentum. Someone pressures you emotionally. You react automatically. The cycle continues. Observation interrupts the cycle. When you pause long enough to observe, emotional pressure loses force. Patterns become visible, intention becomes clearer, and once patterns become visible repeatedly, control weakens dramatically, because awareness restores choice. The importance of inner stability. People who are internally unstable search constantly for external anchors: approval, identity, belonging, authority. This creates vulnerability. But grounded individuals develop internal reference points, values, principles, self-awareness, emotional regulation. These foundations make external pressure less destabilizing, because their identity is not entirely controlled by external reaction. Freedom requires responsibility. Many people want freedom emotionally without accepting the responsibility that comes with it. True autonomy requires self-observation, discipline, critical thinking, emotional maturity. Without these qualities, people often exchange one form of control for another. Freedom is not merely the absence of pressure. It is the capacity to think and choose consciously despite pressure. Breaking control is a continuous process. There is no final moment where influence disappears completely. You will always encounter social pressure, persuasive systems, emotional influence, external narratives. The goal is not perfect immunity. The goal is increasing awareness. Each layer of awareness restores more intentionality to your decisions, and intentionality is the foundation of autonomy. Closing insight. The most powerful form of control is the kind that feels invisible. And the moment you begin questioning the forces shaping your thoughts, emotions, and decisions, you begin reclaiming something essential: your ability to choose consciously. Chapter 15. Designing Your Own Power Structure. By now, one thing should be clear. Power is not a single moment. It is not charisma, not domination, not temporary visibility. Power is structure. A system of positioning, perception, leverage, discipline, and emotional control working together over time. And once you understand this, your relationship with life changes. You stop chasing isolated outcomes. You begin designing systems. Most people live reactively. Many people move through life responding rather than designing. They react to circumstances, emotions, pressure, trends, expectations, urgency. As a result, their direction becomes fragmented. Their decisions are shaped more by immediate stimulation than long-term intention. This creates instability, because without structure, external forces constantly dictate movement. And where there is no intentional architecture, random influence fills the space. Your life already has a structure. Whether consciously designed or not, your current life is built around systems. Your routines, your environment, your relationships, your habits, your emotional patterns, your priorities. Together, these elements create your personal architecture. And this architecture either strengthens your clarity or weakens it. Either expands your influence or drains your energy. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything reinforces something. Power begins with internal order. Before external influence becomes sustainable, internal structure must exist. Without internal order, emotion overrides judgment. Distraction weakens focus. Insecurity distorts perception. External pressure controls direction. This is why disciplined individuals often appear calmer. They are not free from emotion. They simply possess structure strong enough to prevent emotion from controlling every decision. Internal stability creates external consistency, and consistency builds trust, leverage, and influence over time. Design your environment carefully. Environment shapes identity more than most people realize. What surrounds you repeatedly begins shaping your standards, your thinking, your emotional state, your ambitions. This is why intentional people become selective about who they spend time with, what information they consume, what environments influence them daily. Because repeated exposure becomes psychological conditioning over time, and conditioning shapes behavior. Build systems that compound. Power grows through accumulation. Small, consistent structures eventually create disproportionate results. A disciplined routine compounds. A strong reputation compounds. A valuable skill compounds. Clear thinking compounds. Trust compounds. This is why sustainable power rarely appears dramatic in the beginning. Its strength comes from repetition over time. Many people fail because they chase intensity instead of consistency. But consistency creates architecture. Protect your attention. Attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Whatever controls your attention gradually influences your identity. This is why protecting focus matters deeply. A distracted mind becomes reactive. A reactive mind becomes externally controlled. Intentional people understand that attention must be directed carefully. Otherwise, urgency replaces purpose. Stimulation replaces clarity. Noise replaces thought, and without clarity, structure weakens. Emotional discipline creates freedom. One of the greatest forms of personal power is emotional regulation, not emotional suppression. Regulation. The ability to experience emotion fully, without surrendering control entirely. This changes everything, because emotionally disciplined individuals think more clearly under pressure, recover faster from setbacks, avoid impulsive self-destruction, maintain stability during uncertainty, and stability creates advantage in almost every environment. Build an identity rooted in reality. Many people build identity around external perception, status, attention, validation, approval. This creates fragility because external perception constantly changes. Grounded identity is different. It is built around values, principles, discipline, self-awareness, integrity. These foundations remain stable even when external conditions shift, and internal stability creates long-term resilience. Leverage time instead of fighting it. Powerful structures respect time. They are designed to compound slowly, rather than produce immediate emotional gratification. Most impulsive decisions trade long-term strength for short-term relief. But intentional individuals think differently. They ask, what grows over time? What weakens over time? What future does this behavior create repeatedly? This perspective changes decision-making entirely, because life becomes architectural instead of reactive. Choose what you reinforce. Every repeated action strengthens something. Every habit reinforces identity. Every environment reinforces psychology. Every emotional pattern reinforces behavior. This means your future is shaped not only by major decisions, but by repeated reinforcement. Once you understand this, you become more intentional about what you repeat, what you tolerate, what you normalize, because normalization becomes destiny over time. You do not need to control everything. One of the final lessons of power is this: control has limits. You cannot control other people completely, uncertainty, outcomes perfectly, life itself, and attempts to dominate everything often create suffering. Real power is not obsessive control. It is adaptability, the ability to remain centered while reality changes, the ability to maintain clarity without needing certainty at every moment, the ability to move intentionally despite unpredictability. Power without purpose becomes empty. Many people pursue power without understanding why. They seek influence, status, recognition, authority, believing these things alone will create fulfillment. But power without direction eventually feels hollow, because influence amplifies identity. If there is no meaningful foundation beneath it, emptiness expands alongside success. This is why purpose matters, not as performance, not as branding, but as internal orientation, a reason strong enough to organize your life around consciously. The most powerful structures feel natural. At the highest level, power stops feeling performative. It becomes integrated. Your behavior aligns with your values. Your communication aligns with your thinking. Your environment aligns with your direction. There is less friction because there is less internal contradiction. This creates calmness, and calmness often signals deep structure beneath the surface. Designing a life instead of escaping one. Ultimately, power is not about domination. It is about authorship. The ability to participate consciously in shaping your life, rather than being carried unconsciously by external forces. You may never control everything, but you can design your standards, your habits, your environment, your responses, your direction, and over time, these elements become architecture. The final shift. At the beginning of this book, power may have seemed mysterious, something hidden inside certain people, something distant, something abstract. But now you can see it differently. Power is built, quietly, repeatedly, structurally, through awareness, discipline, positioning, leverage, perception, restraint, and most importantly, through intentional design. Closing insight. The strongest forms of power rarely need to announce themselves. They exist in people who see clearly, think independently, move intentionally, remain emotionally grounded, and build structures capable of surviving pressure and time. Because in the end, power is not about controlling the world. It is about no longer being unconsciously controlled by it. Final reflection. Most people move through life reacting without realizing it. They react to pressure, distraction, expectations, fear, and the invisible systems shaping their decisions every day. Over time, these reactions become patterns, and those patterns quietly shape identity, behavior, and direction. But awareness changes everything. The moment you begin seeing power clearly, the world starts looking different. You notice the structures beneath behavior, the emotional dynamics hidden inside interactions, and the invisible forces shaping perception long before outcomes appear. What once felt random begins to make sense. The purpose of understanding power is not domination, it is clarity. Real power is rarely loud. It appears in emotional discipline, restraint, self-awareness, intentional thinking, and the ability to remain grounded while others react impulsively. The strongest people are often the ones who can think clearly in environments filled with pressure and noise. This is why true power begins internally. Without awareness, people become reactive. Without discipline, they become predictable. But with clarity and intentionality, a person stops living entirely by reaction and begins living by design. That is the deeper meaning of this book. Not controlling others, but reclaiming ownership over yourself, your attention, your emotions, your thinking, and your direction. Because in the end, the deepest form of power is not controlling the world around you. It is no longer being unconsciously controlled by it.